Getaway, getaway, getaway now. Getaway, getaway, getaway now. Take a plane, take a train, take a car, just getaway, getaway, getaway now. No need to be far, just getaway, getaway, getaway now. The world is small, many ports to call, just getaway, getaway, getaway now.
And welcome to Getaway Girl. I'm Regina Ayars, and I am the Getaway Girl. Although I'm certainly not a girl anymore, when I travel, I do take on a different persona. Lighter, freer, more willing to be spontaneous, and able to just go with the flow. I plan, but when the plan has to change, I can do it with less heartburn and a sense that it will all work out. So during the next 30 minutes, come with me and see how traveling can open up new vistas for you. This is part 2 of a 2-part episode of Getaway Girl, where we are traveling to Africa, to 2 landlocked countries, Uganda and Rwanda, to see the great apes, chimpanzees, and gorillas. For those of you that did not watch part 1, here is the itinerary, the trip that my daughter and I took with National Geographic over the holidays in 2014-2015. In part 1, I focused on chimpanzees in Uganda. In part 2, we are going to focus on gorillas in both Uganda and Rwanda. We drove towards the Congo border as we started the second half of our trip. Our next stop was the Bwindi Impenetrable National Park. That's a tongue twister. We traveled through the remote southern section of the Queen Elizabeth National Park, known as Ishasha, the same name as the river that runs along the border with the Congo. We stopped for a picnic. In spite of fearsome hippos along the banks, one of my traveling companions walked out to the river's edge so she could say she had been in the Congo. I think she would have had to have waded out to the middle of the river to actually claim that. But with the hippos, she didn't dare. We travel on and settle into our lodge, going to bed early in preparation for our early morning mountain gorilla tracking. Currently, the mountain gorilla's habitat is limited to protected national parks in 2 regions of Africa. One group of gorillas lives in the Bwindi Impenetrable National Park in Uganda. The other group is spread over 3 national parks in the Virunga Mountain region of the Democratic Republic of Congo, Rwanda, and Uganda. There are less than 900 mountain gorillas left in the wild. This is such a tragedy. Mountain gorillas live in groups of up to 30. The group or troop is led by a single alpha male. These males are called silverbacks because of the silver stripe they develop on the backs when they mature. The oldest males of the group are at least 12 years old. In addition to providing protection to group members, silverbacks maintain order and decide all the activities within their troop. They schedule feeding trips, resting time, and travel. They also father the majority of the young in the group. Aside from the silver stripe on their backs, male mountain gorillas are distinguished from females because they have a crest of fur on their heads. Both genders have similar thick black hair covering their bodies. This thick hair keeps them warm in cold mountain temperatures. Female gorillas can produce young beginning at age 10. They carry 1 or 2 babies at a time and give birth after an 8.5-month gestation period, very similar to human beings. In general, they will bear between 2 and 6 offspring in a lifetime. Newborn gorillas weigh about 2 pounds at birth. They are as weak and uncoordinated as human babies. For the first 4 years of their lives, they get around by clinging to their mother's backs. And by 3.5 years of age, the young gorillas are fully weaned from their mother's milk and start the same diet as mature mountain gorillas, which are plants, leaves, roots, and shoots. They are vegetarians. The next morning, our group was divided into 2 groups with the more physically fit together. Oop, my gorilla fell over. My daughter wanted us to be together, so I went with her group, the younger and the more physically fit. We gathered at the demarcation point to get instructions from our guide. One warning was to keep at least 7 feet away from the gorillas, especially the babies. They can alarm the mothers. They are curious and will approach humans, even touching them. Their vocalizations alert adults. I thought these bathrooms were very festive. They're clearly built for tourists, one for women and one for men. This is our guide and the young woman that was assigned to me to carry my backpack. Of course, I could carry my own backpack, but this was a job for her. I don't know if she received any money other than a tip that she would get from me. At the end of the tracking, I actually needed her. I'll explain that later. We only had to hike for about 3 hours, but along the way we observed Ugandans farming and going about their daily lives. Look at this woman washing her clothes in the middle of a grassy field. She brings her water and dries the clothes in the sun. Ladies, we have it easy. Here is a small village, and you can see what a typical house would look like. These looked pretty nice. In fact, they may be very nice. I really don't know. Again, you see small children doing what we would consider the work of adults. Children don't experience what we think of as childhood, carefree with no responsibilities. Notice that this little girl is carrying the plate on her head and not the little boy. Repeatedly, girls and women carry everything on their heads. This is true across Africa. As with these little girls, it starts early. The tradition is detrimental to girls. The weight compresses their spines and growth. Combined with early marriage and female genital mutilation, young girls have difficulty giving birth, and there is a high rate of maternal and infant mortality. These 2 boys look like they're carrying water. Can you imagine sending out 2 of your young children, very young children, to get water for washing clothes or cooking or drinking? Now, this little boy was not alone, but he looks very cautious and wary of us. There is always a lead guide and trackers, and these are the trackers that joined us. As I mentioned earlier, there are 3 groups of habituated mountain gorillas left in the world. The group that lives in the Bwindi National Forest is the Rushagura group. Each of the gorillas are named and monitored on a daily basis. It's not only a conservation issue of ensuring the existence of an endangered species, it is also essential to the livelihoods of thousands upon thousands of people. Tourism is the main industry of this area. Okay, back to our gorilla tracking. As I said earlier, I joined the group that was more physically fit. Not a major mistake, but in climbing the hills, I was always the last one up. And I honestly think that the others were grateful because this gave them an opportunity to rest at the top of the hill that they might not have gotten without me bringing up the rear. It was the elevation for me, not necessarily the uphill climb. We hiked for about 3 hours and suddenly the gorillas appeared out of the forest. Let's take a listen. females, juveniles, babies, and the leader, the silverback. Almost silent, they lay on the ground, seeming to be recovering from strenuous activity. Other than looking for food or finding a place to sleep, they just relax, unless they are attacked by poachers, which sadly happens. The poachers are looking for baby gorillas to traffic. The adults will fight to the death to protect their young. We are only allowed to stay 30 minutes. Other groups have already been observing, and others will come later. These gorillas are habituated to humans seeing them every single day. There are other groups that have no human contact and only are observed by workers, making sure that they are not in danger. They live much higher up in the forest and deeper into the Congo, where sadly to say, a civil war has raged on for decades. Now, recently I heard about tours that allow small groups of only up to maybe 4 people plus the guide to observe up to 1 hour. Of course, this opportunity would cost substantially more than the experience that I had. Parks have increased the tracking permit to $1,500 per person, and there are only 96 issued every day. But our time is up, and we start back down the hills and I personally find the downhill harder than the going up. Here is where I really need my helper. I discover that my hiking boots don't fit, they're too big, and my big toes keep ramming into the front end of my boot. I am in pain and I can hardly walk by the time we get back to the Jeeps. I had to baby my feet for the rest of the trip and lost both of my big toenails after I got home. Fortunately, they have grown back. That night, we are entertained by the Batwa Pygmies. The Batwa Pygmies we meet were descendants of the indigenous tribes that lived in the Bwindi forest before it was taken over by the government. These people were forced out without land or any resources to survive. This is what happens to so many indigenous people around the world, whether it's in the Americas, Australia, Africa, or Asia. Let's listen to them dancing. Look at this smile. I know they are performing, but this smile looks so genuine. Now, the following series of pictures is a reenactment of capturing fire. The first one is meant to intimidate fire into submission. The rest show the men doing what all people did to build a fire before matches came along. They dance for the tourist and sell their beautiful baskets. I have brought some baskets with me for you to see. Here's one. I love the colors. This is for a hot plate. I use this quite a bit. And this is a little basket that I put my essential oils in to flavor my water at home. Now, after viewing the gorillas in the Bwindi National Forest, next morning we drive towards the Rwandan border. Along the way, we see this young boy. He's standing alongside the road with a long stick with a lizard sitting on the stick. We stop, and he wants money from us to take a picture. Of course, there's probably about 6 of us in the truck. We all want a picture. He was a real entrepreneur. I never saw that before on my trips. We see people, many people, walking towards the border. Once again, these women with heavy loads on their heads. We cross the Rwandan border. This looks pretty straightforward, but after this, we encountered chaos. Our trip coincided with the Ebola epidemic, which we were assured would not be a problem for us on our particular itinerary. But we had to have our temperature taken before we cross over into Rwanda. There was no security, so people crossed at will. It was total chaos. Anybody could have crossed over without getting their temperature taken. They really needed a Trump wall on the Rwandan border. Now, Rwanda, the land of 1,000 hills, is sadly infamous for the 1994 genocide of close to 1 million people in 100 days. They were almost exclusively the Tutsi tribe, a horrific tragedy that was the culmination of decades of resentments between the two tribes, the Hutu and the Tutsi. One, a minority, the Tutsis, but in power, and the other, the Hutu, a majority, but living like second-class citizens. We are staying in the middle of the Virunga Forest in the Parc National des Volcans, our 4th national park. This is where Dian Fossey established her research station in 1967. She was murdered here in 1985 after 18 years of study of the mountain gorillas. She clearly put them on the global map and left a legacy of close to, as we said, 900 remaining mountain gorillas. She wrote a book, Gorillas in the Mist, and it was made into a movie after her death. Sigourney Weaver played her. Called one of the foremost primatologists in the world, Fossey, along with Jane Goodall and Brute Galdicus, were the so-called primates. Now, Jane Goodall is still alive, and I believe the other woman is too, Brute. They were 3 prominent researchers on primates sent by Leakey to study great apes in their natural environments. Now, Fossey strongly opposed wildlife tourism, as gorillas are very susceptible to human diseases like influenza, for which they have no immunity. Fossey reported several cases in which gorillas died because of diseases spread by tourists. She also viewed tourism as an interference into their natural wild behavior. Fossey criticized tourist programs often paid for by international conservation organizations. And she criticized them for interfering with both her research and the peace of the mountain gorilla's habitat. And she was concerned about Jane Goodall's efforts. Now, Jane Goodall actually felt like she was a member of a chimpanzee society as a member, although chimps, I'm sure, didn't actually agree with her. She thought she was. And Fossey felt that this was totally inappropriate because she would be changing her study subject's behavior. Now, we arrive at our last lodge. Here is the view from our cottage and a view of our netted beds. Oh, they were so yummy. I wish my bedroom looked like this at home. Next morning, we're off for our last gorilla tracking. This time, I joined the slower moving group, which meant we traveled on flatter ground. Walking across fields, we saw people working. Look at this woman in her dress. I love bright colors of the women. They wear them even when they're planting crops. In the background, you can see 3 women hoeing and a man watching them. Now tell me, what is wrong with this picture? Here is our guide for this tracking. Guides are highly trained, working their way up to lead guide over many years. Finally, we quickly discover the gorillas. We find them sitting together under the trees. Now look at the lashes on this juvenile. This gorilla is building a nest in a tree. Then you can see the finished nest. They sleep up off of the ground. Now I love this picture. He looks so calm and peaceful. He is a silverback. He's like sunning himself. Look at these infants. They're so adorable, all fuzzy and wide-eyed. They stay very close to the adults. The big surprise, hold on folks, that we encountered was that we got to observe 2 gorillas having sexual intercourse. Yes, having sex, screwing, doing it. We were flabbergasted. Our guide said that this was rarely observed by humans. And not much noise, but the woman kept insisting, or the female kept insisting on multiple tries. I don't know what that means. Anyway, let's hear from someone else that went on a gorilla expedition. I'm here today interviewing Sunny Anderson.
Experienced.
I understand that you planned your trip.
I did. That I was interested in doing was traveling by land so that we could actually spend time in villages and see how Africans live and see what the countryside looked like. So I found this wonderful overland camping safari which provides transportation from point A to point B to point C to wherever. You can go on it for as little as you want or as long as you want. They camp near villages. So you set up your tent, or you might stay in little guest houses right near a village, and so you have a chance to interact with the locals. They buy local food, and you help in the preparation of the meals, which are very simple. There were a lot of backpackers on the truck with us. It only carried, I'm thinking we had anywhere between 12 and 16 people, but all Europeans or from other countries. No Americans except for us. And so one of the things I really wanted to do was to go see the mountain gorillas. I was a big fan of Dian Fossey, read a lot of books about Rwanda and Uganda and the mountain gorillas, and there's so few of them left now, I think fewer than 650. And so I figured it was now or never. You have to get a permit, which was quite expensive and took a while, but the permit fees go to support the conservation efforts of keeping these gorillas' habitat alive, and more importantly, community development projects, teaching the people who live in that area how to take care of the gorillas, not poach them, and being able to return money to them through the permit fees. So the $700 permit fee seemed like a good investment at the time. So once we got the permit, then I made contact with the national park in Uganda that has a troop of gorillas, and contracted with the rangers because you can't go into the park on your own. And there were 4 of us, so we were assigned 2 rangers, one who would go in front of us, one who would go behind us, because these are wild animals, and a tracker, and the tracker set off way before us. It was quite an experience because you don't know where the gorillas are going to be. They move from place to place. We ended up bushwhacking through this mountainous country, up and down the sides of mountains, pulling ourselves up by jungle vines for close to 10 hours.
Oh my
But we were rewarded. We came upon a troop of about 20 gorillas, including a giant silverback, of course, and lots of little babies. Oh, it was so exciting. And we were actually clinging to the side of a mountain on a little path that the gorillas had gone across, and the silverback was sitting at one end of this path, and the silverback wannabe was at the other end. So I laughed and said we were a gorilla sandwich, because the ranger said, freeze, don't move, just pull yourself back against, hold on to the vines, and pull yourself back against the side of the mountain. And every now and then the gorilla was munching, and the silverback was munching away on leaves and things. Every now and then he'd stop and beat his chest and just letting us know that he was here. In the meantime, the mothers and the babies were swinging from the trees and running down the path and playing and stopping and looking at us. It was an incredible experience. Normally, you're only allowed to observe the gorillas for 30 minutes, as they don't want anybody interfering with what the gorillas do naturally. However, we were sort of trapped because we couldn't go this way and we couldn't go that way, so we actually got to observe them for over an hour before finally the silverback kind of pulled himself up and lumbered off, and then everybody else followed him. And then once the side of the mountain was clear, we scrambled down and out of there. But it was an amazing experience. It was a wonderful trip. It was a tough trip. I mean, it wasn't easy. We were dirty, we were hungry, we were tired. There were times when, what the heck are we on this truck for?
Well, thank you so much.
You're
Sunny.
welcome.
I really appreciate you sharing your travels with us.
Thank you.
Sunny was able to see the gorillas much better than I did. Our gorillas were in thick vegetation. The gorillas Sunny saw were on an open trail and very vocal. Each trekking experience is different and unique. Our last night, we enjoyed another performance by dancers. Let's listen. I'm standing on the terrace at our lodge just before sunset with the Virunga mountain peak in the mist behind me on my last evening in Africa. Our final day of the expedition, we drove to Kigali, the capital of Rwanda. Kigali is a world apart from Kampala, the capital of Uganda. Although damaged during the genocide, the city's infrastructure has recovered, much due to President Paul Kagame. He has been the president of Rwanda since 2000 and does not seem likely to give up his position anytime soon. He was reelected in 2017 and can remain in office until 2034. This is what happens in many African countries. Good men take on the management of their countries, but eventually become dictators, even though they are democratically elected. It happened in Zimbabwe. And 30 plus years later, President Mugabe has just been removed. He destroyed the vibrant economy of that country, formerly Rhodesia. As an aside, Trump met with Kagame at Davos, in January, and acknowledged that Rwanda was a great country, even though it was one of those you-know-what-hole African countries. Good news. Rwanda has more women in their lower house of legislation, 64%, than any other country in the world. The U.S. only has 19%. Women had to step up after the genocide, and since men were dead, they were able to gain political power. In the morning, we went to the Dian Fossey Gorilla Fund International. As I mentioned earlier, Dian Fossey did not believe in ecotourism, but today, the Dian Fossey International Fund promotes tourism which they say helps to create a stable and sustainable local community dedicated to protecting the gorillas and their habitat. We got a tour of the inside and saw skeletons of gorillas and heard from an on-site primatologist about the history and legacy of Dian Fossey. In the afternoon, some chose one last trekking adventure into the wild to find the golden monkeys. They were rewarded. Golden monkeys live in bamboo vegetation, and I brought a sample here with me, towards the base of the volcanoes, and habituation has helped them to overcome their initial shyness to accepting their daily visit by researchers and tourists. I chose to go to the Rwandan Genocide Memorial Museum, small but powerful. The memorial is part of a museum tracing the events of the Rwandan genocide and other genocides, and a mass burial ground of over 250,000 victims. This is the first genocide museum I have ever visited. Whether you call it ethnic cleansing or genocide, the desired result is the elimination of a group of people. Thankfully, that was not accomplished with the Jews or the Tutsis or the Armenians or the South Sudanese. In our country, it was the Native Americans. This is criminal and shameful. We met up at the Hotel del Mille Collines, I think I'm pronouncing that correct, which was called the Hotel Rwanda in the movie about the 1994 genocide. In the movie, it was portrayed as being in the country on a dirt road. Well, no way, it's right in the middle of downtown. That's the movies for you, artistic liberty. Well, that's all the time we have for Getaway Girl and the Great Apes of Africa Part 2. I hope you were able to watch both episodes and learned more about traveling and how it takes you outside of yourself and into other places that can open you to new people, new experiences, and new inspiration. I want to thank my outstanding crew, my director, Wanda Borland, Lynn Likens, and JC, and John Letts, who had a real challenge with all the graphics. And we have two new people, Shirley and what's the other gentleman's name? Arthur. So thanks to both of them. I also want to thank Rogue Valley Community TV and SOU for providing the Digital Media Center for the recording and live broadcasting of public access shows created by members of our community for members of our community. To access archived public access programming, click on the link at the top of the page. Type in Getaway Girl and watch all episodes. I am also the producer of another Rogue Valley TV show, Girl Talk. Along with my co-host, Carol Voisin, we interview and showcase women of the Rogue Valley who are making a difference in our communities. Check it out on channel 115 for Ashland HomeNet and 182 for Charter on Thursdays at 6:30 or Saturdays at 3 p.m. Or you can always live stream on archive.org. That's all for now for Getaway Girl. Thanks for watching and bye.
Getaway, getaway, getaway now. Getaway, getaway, getaway now. Take a plane, take a train, take a car, just getaway, getaway, getaway now. No need to be far, just getaway, getaway, getaway now. The world is small, many ports to call, just getaway, getaway, getaway now.